Консервативна партія запропонувала українській пресі «Новому шляху» та нашій телемережі «Контакт» записати в студії «Контакту» ексклюзивне інтерв'ю з новим провідником консервативної партії П'єр Поilievre, яке відбулося відразу після закінчення пресової конференції.
Вітаємо вас, дорогі глядачі, на українській телемережі «Контакт». І сьогодні маємо надзвичайну приємність вітати П'єр Поilievre, який є представник консервативної партії і голова опозиції в канадському парламенті. Welcome to our show, Mr. Poilievre. Thank you very much for engaging with the ethnic media like you did just now. And we'd like to start off the first question with one of the points that was brought up was Iran as a terrorist state, which you responded to quite well. At the recent security forum in Hamilton, Russia was front and center as a security issue, and the European community declared Russia a terrorist state this week. And we know for sure that Russia's been, how do I say, moving around our Arctic with flags, with submarines, and already probing to see how far they can get in territories that are considered Canadian. What would be your response to Russia today? They've already attacked Ukraine. They've been probing Canada. How do you feel this affects the international scene and Canada's security in relation to this?
Well, I think we need to support Ukraine against Russian aggression with sanctions against the key Russian officials, with more ongoing support for arms and finances for Ukrainian resistance to the invasion. Here in Canada, we need to reinforce our armed forces, have a stronger military presence in the north, so that we can stake claim to all of our Arctic sovereignty. And, there's an old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. So we need to be present, and our military needs to be robust and everywhere in our northern sphere to protect it from any that might try to encroach.
Now, is there any way that today Canada can militarily help Ukraine? Because everybody's commenting that the world is helping Ukraine to not lose, but not helping Ukraine enough to win.
Well, I'm not proposing, direct military involvement in the conflict. I think that would open up a whole new chapter. So, but what I think we can do is provide the military equipment support and the finances that Ukraine needs to defend itself, and I must say has been doing a terrific job fighting back the Russians over the last several months, and with some great success, and I think great astonishment to a lot of people who never expected that the Ukrainian people could be so resilient against a much bigger foe.
We have parallel to this the concept of general support. We mentioned Iran. Iran is on the forefront of changing their concept of democracy and what should be allowed and what shouldn't. Ukraine is on the forefront on the fight for democracy. What do you think Canada's position should be in terms of leadership of the world in defense of democracy, not just military?
Well, we should side with democracy. That should be our overall bias. The more democracy that exists in the world, the better it is for Canada. We know that democracies almost never go to war against one another. It's almost always a dictatorship that provokes conflict. That was the case in both world wars, in the Korean War, and in the war in Afghanistan, the war against ISIS. It's either terrorists or tyrants that initiate wars and not democracies. So we as a country should be biased in favor of democracy and in favor of the alliance of democracies around the world.
And back a little bit more to Canada in a different way. We have Trudeau that buys a pipeline. Quebec says, hey, we're not interested.
Yeah.
So what do? We do know clean energies have to play a role, but there's still a lot of time before that happens. How do we use what we have in the meantime in spite of Quebec's no?
Well, look, you're right about the world needing traditional energy. You've got the International Energy Agency has said that 20 years from now, even with the most aggressive climate change action by all of the world's countries, the world will still be using 60 million barrels of oil a day. And that is if every government aggressively attacks and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. That's the low end. The high end is 100 million. Where should that oil come from? Do we want it to come from Russia, from Venezuela, or do we want it to come from Canada? I think it should come from our country. We can produce it while minimizing the upstream emissions. In Western Canada, they've dramatically reduced the emissions intensity of each barrel of oil. They could incorporate carbon capture and storage, which puts the carbon back in the ground where it came from, from their industrial processes. They could also use nuclear energy to power the oil sands without emissions. That could make Canada's oil the cleanest and lowest emitting barrel anywhere on Earth. And I think we should do that. I mean, right now, look, if we had the Energy East pipeline today, we could be supplying something like 1/5 of European demand with Canadian oil. But of course, we can't get our oil to Eastern Canada because there is no pan-Canadian pipeline. But there are alternatives. I believe that we should open up the Port of Churchill to oil exports, which I think you could do 2, maybe even parts of 3 seasons to get oil out through the north. There's also Newfoundland oil, which doesn't need to be shipped. It's right there. It's in the east. Newfoundland wants to increase its production by 400,000 barrels a day. I would approve that, and that would allow us to displace the overseas oil that we're importing at the St. John terminal, St. John refinery in New Brunswick. And finally, there's natural gas. As you know, Putin is using natural gas as his major lever. The Germans need an alternative. The Germans built a natural gas import, liquid natural gas import terminal in 194 days. That includes permitting. Here in Canada, it takes like 5, 6, 7 years just to get a permit before the shovel goes in the ground. Let's speed up the permitting and get the natural gas liquefaction export terminals built. That way we can ship. We don't ship a single cubic foot of natural gas overseas. It all goes to the States, and they get to make all the profit. There were 15 of these liquefaction facilities proposed when Trudeau took office. 0 have been completed because it's impossible to get anything done in this country. Get the gatekeepers out of the way. Bring in a new law that protects the environment, consults First Nations, but gets projects built. And let's liquefy natural gas in the east and in the west, ship it overseas, use it to shut down coal-fired electricity in Asia, use it to break the dependence on Putin in Europe. That's the way forward.
You also mentioned during the press conference the international credentials, and you did acknowledge that it's provincial jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But where would you like to steer the whole picture so that we can and include and involve all these people that can help bring up Canada's economy?
Well, that's what we need to do. We've got hundreds of thousands of foreign trained professionals that can't get a license to practice as doctors, engineers, architects, etc. And licensing is provincial, but the federal government does sign immigration and job training deals all the time with the province. So there's no reason why we can't do it again. I would set a goal. I think all the provinces would have a hard time refusing that goal. And the goal should be this. An immigrant applying to work in a profession should get a yes or no within 60 days based on tested ability, not based on where they come from, rather than dragging it out for 3, 4, 5 years while they're stuck in a low-wage job. You should be able to take tests to show that you're capable of being a radiologist or an engineer. And then if you pass, you're in. If you don't, you're out. And the standard should be the same whether you're trained in Red Deer or in Baghdad. The standard should be a Canadian standard. So let's do that. We already do it with the trades, by the way. If you come to Canada, you can challenge at the Red Seal examination process to become an electrician. If you pass, then you're licensed based on your ability. I'll give you an example of how crazy it is right now. We had the head of the Aviation Association come and say that there was an aeronautic mechanic working for Air Canada in Munich, fixing airplanes. The planes come down, they're landing in Europe, they need to be fixed up. He went in and did the job for 10 years. He says, I'm going to move to Canada. He moves to Canada. He says, the good news is I already have a job with a Canadian company. Gets here, finds out he can't do the same job on the same planes that he was doing over in Europe. Why? Couldn't get his license. So we need to fix that. Test people, show they're competent. If they are, get them to work, and let's get bigger paychecks for our immigrants.
Okay, well, thank you very much. As a last question before we move on, a little bit back to Canada's military. It used to be said, both in relation to NATO as well as NORAD, that Canada used to punch above its weight.
Yeah.
Now everybody's saying Canada's punching below its weight. What would you as Prime Minister propose, both in terms of any kind of leadership or upgrade of our military standards, both in relation to what we provide for NATO and also for NORAD that's protecting us for almost nothing?
Right. Well, I think the 2% of GDP goal is something we should pursue. It's going to take a time to get there for two reasons. One, we've got to find the money, and two, we've got to figure out how to spend it. Right now, the federal government is running big deficits in a high inflation and high interest rate environment. That's not an easy time to find the cash. The second problem is that we can't get the money out the door because of our terrible procurement system. Slow, bureaucratic, politically backwards. And so I want to make sure we can fix our procurement and make it fast and easy to buy equipment. The way it was during the war in Afghanistan, we were able to buy equipment really fast and put it on the ground in the hands of our troops because we had no choice. That's what we need to do for all of our procurement. Simple, fast, results-driven, that puts the taxpayer and the soldier at the front of the line rather than the bureaucracy and the special interest groups.
We have a new pathway partner here, even in our same office. Maybe we could, Yuri, maybe a question for Mr. Poilievre.
There was news that actually the Quebecers, they do support, there was an opinion poll, they do support the natural gas development and even the pipelines that would enable Canada to export LNG to Europe, for instance. What do you think about and you said that you would encourage the Quebec government to actually rethink their position and develop the pipelines and the oil and gas in Quebec.
Right. Look, I can't force anything on anybody. A natural gas liquefaction facility would need both a federal and a provincial permit. So I can't impose the thing, but I would continue to make the argument to the Quebec government that it is in the interest of Quebecers to liquefy that gas in Saguenay or some other place in the province so we can ship it off to Europe. Right now, we don't export any natural gas overseas, even though we have a 1,300 trillion cubic feet of this stuff. We also have major geographical advantages. Canada is the shortest North American shipping distance to Europe and Asia. And also we have meteorological advantages. The cold weather here actually makes it easier to liquefy. When you turn a gas into a liquid, it's how do you do that? You cool it down. So the Americans down on the Gulf Coast, they have an extra 15 degrees they have to pull out of the gas in order to liquefy it more than we do. So they have to spend more energy. And by the way, our energy that we use to liquefy is cleaner energy. We've got hydroelectricity in Quebec, Newfoundland, and British Columbia. So use clean energy, cool temperatures, shorter shipping distances to get our gas to the market and get paychecks to our people.
So you think it's doable?
Look, I think it's doable, and the Quebec government has said no, but it's not only Quebec that is proposing these things. There's an LNG Newfoundland and Labrador project under consideration. There's the reversal of the Rexall terminal in New Brunswick. It's already there, it just needs to be reversed so that it becomes export rather than import driven. And then there's numerous LNG projects proposed by First Nations community. There's one by the Niska, another by the Hezla, and then there's of course the LNG Canada project that's already being done in the West. So there's lots of different places and different proposals. I think the federal government needs to speed up the process to approve these things so that we can get them done.
Окей, дуже дякую, пане Юрій. Дорогі глядачі, це був редактор «Нового шляху», пан Юрій Білінський. Дякуємо за питання. А це голова консервативної партії Канади і офіційна опозиція в канадському парламенті, пан Pierre Poilievre. So thank you very much, Pierre. Thanks for engaging with the social media, with our ethnic media, and with us today on KONTAKT.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.